About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, this show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it better. And I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture. And through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'll be explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetic is spelled Noetic. Now, over the course of these programs, we've learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of at this moment, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects. We're calling those our normal awareness, or the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, which keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, and the superconscious mind, which connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions. We learned that we can change our state of consciousness, so we're aware of different aspects of the mind at different times. And then we learned that the brain modifies whatever sensory signals it receives to fit past patterns of experience, following a default network in the neuronal paths. This means we perceive, we see, hear, taste, and feel what we expect to experience based on the past. We also saw that our body often responds faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel, and typically before we're even aware of it. Some experiments have even demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. And we learned that no one has yet been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in brain tissue. So, based on all of this, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is in fact the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. This field may be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches around the body in what some say is an egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Mind, then, is best considered as a field, a pattern of energy that contains information and exists whether the body is functioning or not, and permeates and develops with the body and the brain. The brain, therefore, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the organs and senses and transmitting them to the body and the mind. We've learned that this field of mind affects energy and matter in a variety of ways. For example, in quantum physics, where the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. And people's bodies and pets have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way, even though they cannot see or hear them. Individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or printouts, and the collective human mind changes the readouts from random number generators on the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields, and they vibrate along similar patterns, resonating with each other, so minds affect each other across space and time. And a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual mind then as part of a larger field, equating mind with the quantum or zero-point field out of which all matter and energy arises. And some researchers are using the equations of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms to describe the role of our consciousness in the formation of matter. These understandings help to explain things like the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, insight, intuition, and channeling that access information from the quantum, or what some people call the Akashic field, how dreams affect the body and consciousness, how music affects the brain and body and connects us with other fields of mind, how we enhance or slow down healing through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations, and how the belief in a treatment can help a patient experience healing in the placebo effect, how remote viewing and telekinesis work, how we can get into that state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync, maximizing our effectiveness, and how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in the information we receive from the world and from our mind. These past shows are archived on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention. Well, last week we looked at some interesting things that might be called paranormal, and I thought we would kind of continue on that road this week, looking at the work of a licensed, actually a master hypnotherapist. His name is Steve Burgess, and he has found that many medical anomalies can be understood more fully if he can take people back into the first experience of that, which often looks like what he calls a past life regression. I'll let him talk about it.
Let me just give you a bigger picture of regression, if I may, first of all, and then if I can then look at the past lives more deeply. So when we do regression in therapy, regression means to go back into the past in our thoughts. So the regression model that we work in is that all of our issues as human beings come from locked-in feelings and emotions from past traumas. And those traumas take place in three areas: in this life, and most of us carry baggage from our present lifetime, in past lives, and in our ancestors' lives, our forfedra. So for some of my clients, we work in all three areas. For sometimes we have to work in this life, releasing trauma, past lives, and ancestors' lives. For other clients, we just work in one area. So that's the regression model. Mm-hmm. With past life regression, we're going back into specific past lives that contain traumas that are affecting us today. It's often death trauma, and so many of us carry horrible deaths from previous lifetimes, which are affecting us now. Not always, but about 60% of past life regression is releasing or healing death trauma. Now, yes, we've lived many, many lifetimes. My belief is we've lived thousands of lives on this planet. We also live past lives on other planets as other life forms. We occasionally will incarnate as an animal occasionally. So sometimes in my therapy sessions, I have clients who go into animal past lives. But, not very often, but it's nearly always the traumas in the past lives, and especially death traumas, that need to be released. So let's say we've lived 1,000 of past lives. Well, all of those past lives do not ripen, that's the Buddhist term, in this present lifetime. Only certain lives will ripen in this present life, our present life, and will affect us now. So it means that because if we had all of our thousands of past lives affecting us now, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. We'd be totally screwed up all day long. So it's only some of the past lives that are actually coming through in this lifetime that need to be worked on.
Thousands of past lives and only a few affecting this life now, and those mostly through the death traumas. This is the observation of a man who has led over 7,000 past life regressions over a 30-year period. Wow. And Mr. Burgess, Dr. Burgess, I'm not sure which, has identified that the death traumas of previous lifetimes are most likely to affect us in this lifetime. But the most interesting thing here, I think, is that he is saying that who we are is clearly not limited to this body in this 3D existence. Who we are is affected by and has memories that have somehow been woven into the body, mind, psyche, the brain system from all of these other times. Isn't that interesting? So mind not only surrounds and infuses through this body in this moment in space and time, but our mind is affected by whatever body it has infused at any time. And as this body is developing the brain and the neural networks in the brain, and in particularly the default network in the brain, then those experiences of previous lifetimes are brought forward. Now, there's a whole model of why this is and how this is. Actually, there are two that may be relevant here. So the first one is that as we move between one life and the next, and this is pretty well documented by other hypnotherapists who are engaging in regression therapy and finding people talking about the experience between a lifetime and this lifetime, that during that space in between, the soul, the mind, the being that we are, that field of informed energy that is our unique pattern of vibrations in the universe, makes choices about where we're going to go next, how we're going to develop next. And developing is the number one goal. Not avoiding distress, not minimizing wrongdoing, but developing, becoming more fully who we actually are. So that model would suggest that we would choose to remember and kind of weave into our DNA and brain structure development the experiences from previous lifetimes that will most profoundly shape the next one that we are entering into. Another model is based on resonance of energy fields. It's similar to Rupert Sheldrake's model of morphic resonance between life forms on this planet, but it goes beyond, and it says that across the universes, there is only one moment happening. And all these appearances of past and present and future are simply that one moment unfolding and becoming more fully who and what the all that is becoming in and through us. And that any experience that we can resonate with in this moment that is like an experience across space and time, all of those resonating experiences will come forward into this moment to help us move through this moment and continue that same number one goal, our development as the essence of all that is individually. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, a radio show exploring what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be better if we understood it more fully. I am Ruth Miller, and that sound tells me it's time for us to be looking at a book, what you have been asking about in our emails, possibly a news item, as we go forward. I thought we might look a little more at this whole idea of these two models of consciousness operating and developing in the universe. The first one that I shared, the one that says that we go linearly from lifetime to lifetime, and in between lifetimes we experience a space and a place and support for how we might experience more life and how we might develop further through an experience on the planet. Those of you who have seen the Robin Williams film, What Dreams May Come, will see an example of exactly that at the end of the film. What it is that we think is actually happening. Now, those of us who are exploring other models would say that that is what happens when people haven't fully entered into the fullness of the other side of the veil. They are hanging out, if you will, in a space that's just barely different from our life on planet Earth. They experience more direct effects of their thoughts, more immediate, because they're not hindered by the delays that are built into matter, but they are nonetheless living in a variation of their Earth life. And so after a period of time, they feel drawn back into the earth life. This fits the Buddhist model of the wheel of incarnation. You never really get off the wheel in this model because you're continually redoing, re-exploring, and developing through experiences on planet Earth. Another model is presented in the Jane Roberts work. Many of you have read the Seth books, one or more of them. I particularly recommend the fiction work that she wrote. She was a novelist and a poet before she started to do the channeling work with Seth. And the book is called The Education of Oversoul 7. There is now a trilogy, so it's the Oversoul 7 trilogy. And in that series, Jane is attempting to give us a felt experience of what Seth has been describing. And what Seth describes and what Oversoul 7 experiences is multiple lifetimes happening across multiple points in space and time, affecting each other as they develop individually. And Oversoul 7 is growing in the process and developing into a more mature soul. It's a fascinating set of stories, and it's a very different model of how things are. It's based on the idea of simultaneity. It's saying that all that is happening everywhere in all that is happening now, and that we have access to all of that. And to some extent, that actually corresponds to some of the things we have talked about in our explorations of the quantum or Akashic field. All that is possible is in the field, and only what we are resonating with in the moment can be our experience. So this model suggests that what we are calling past lives are actually happening concurrently with us, and future lives also. That the whole being that we are is developing through the development of each of these lifetimes and the coordinated, overlapping resonance between them. I'm going to give you a quick story to help you understand why I think this might be so. There was a time when I was having considerable physical issues, and someone suggested that hypnotherapy might be helpful because the doctors didn't understand what was going on. At that time, I was working in a university in a tower that was built out of cinder block and had narrow windows. And my office was in the corner. I was directing a program. And there were 2 or 3 of those narrow windows. And I put my desk in the corner nearest those windows, and the door was in the opposite corner into my space. During that time, I would occasionally wake up with my arm dislocated, an odd sort of symptom, I think. And that was part of why hypnotherapy was suggested. So this therapist worked with me, and I found myself in a suit of armor in a battlefield at the end of the day. Dusk was falling, and the pickers were going through. Those are the guys that come through with their knives and their bags. They're collecting anything of value from the dead bodies in the battle. They were across the field, so I was able to inch my way under a bush and was not visible to them before dark. After dark, I managed to get myself out of the armor, but my arm was injured and I couldn't use it. So I couldn't fully undress, but I sufficiently out of the armor to move out of the battlefield. I moved down into the valley, into the gulch, the ditch that was near there, drank a little water, gathered a few dried berries, and followed the stream down to a field that I knew very well, and went across the field and moved into the hospital of a monastery. I ended up staying there in that story, in that sequence of experiences, and the next scene unfolds that I was sitting in a stone wall room with narrow windows, advising people who came in through the door in the opposite corner. There's more to the story than that, but I felt immediately that this event had come into my awareness, regardless of whether it had been anything my soul had experienced, because it was so similar to what I was going through physically in that moment. It was a resonant experience. That's my example of how what is often called a past life may or may not be past, and in fact is probably concurrently happening, and that the work that I was doing at that time was affecting that being, and that being was affecting me. I did, by the way, end up healing the arm, and I moved on from that job. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing here if I had stayed there. So, two models, two understandings, both of them work. And both of them, therefore, have a certain amount of reality. If we are going to understand the nature of consciousness as a mind field, then we need to look at broader understandings and not be stuck in that sequential idea of what space and time must be. Well, okay, now it looks as if we need to look at a science story, and there's a really interesting one. I've been telling you about a field, and a field has resonant frequencies. Well, there's more and more evidence that individual cells have resonant frequencies. They're rates of vibration that match their own natural frequencies that cause the cells to vibrate with larger amplitude. The idea has been looking at particular cells, the things that are at the edge of the cells that can bend or vibrate when a load is placed on them. And previous research found that these parts of the cells had moved in unexpected ways. People didn't understand it, but then people began to realize, quote, "We could never imagine that a living cell could vibrate like this." A scientist called Javier Tamayo said, speaking to the magazine New Scientist, they discovered that not only did the process of picking up the cells cause them to vibrate, but their vibration in turn caused these other parts to vibrate. So cells have resonant frequencies, which is totally in alignment with Rupert Sheldrake's notion of morphic resonance. That is, things adjust and change and develop in alignment with those things that have similar frequencies that they are resonant with. Now, if you're uncomfortable with the idea of resonant, think of the notes in a chord. We all know the scale. We may have heard the song in Sound of Music, you know. Do, re, mi, fa, so. And then in the song, the kids begin to break up into different chords, right? So do, does not resonate really well with re, but it resonates really well with mi, do, mi, sol, mi, do. Well, that's a basic C chord, except I didn't sing it in the key of C, but you get the idea. These are resonances, and this is fascinating news. All right, well, that's it for today's show. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, along with archived past shows, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.